Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Barry Smitherman. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mind going over there? Chairman, thank you for being here.
Evan, thank you for having me. Please call me Barry.
Barry Football is what I'm going to call you. Anyone who goes to anybody who went to A&M gets that for a few weeks until it gets not funny. So we'll just call you Barry Football.
I'll take it.
Okay, I thought we might talk about railroads for 30 minutes. What do you think?
We could. You know, it's surprising during the campaign. I had a number of people come up to me and say, I've ridden your railroads and your people were so friendly.
They're magnificent.
They are.
We love your railroads. If you're responsible for this, we'll reelect you.
And I said we train them well. I'm glad to hear that.
Really, let's start by talking about the shale activity in the state, which is in some ways the big energy story of this year, not only in Texas, but around the country. People want to know about all the shale activity in Texas. Can you quantify for us in dollar terms or in any other terms the magnitude of this? I think some people don't fully appreciate the extent to which the shale activity is driving so many conversations.
Well, first of all, let me introduce my wife of 26 years, Mary Jane, who's joined us.
Hello,
here
how are
today.
you? I will have no mean questions for you, ma'am. I'll save them all for the chairman.
And one of my children will be walking in late. He had to drop his sister off at school.
Excellent.
What is happening in the oil and gas patch these days is revolutionary. This technology, the combination of horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing, has opened up these shale opportunities that geologists always thought were there, but really didn't know how to recover them until George Mitchell, a great Aggie, put the two of these technologies together in the Barnett Shale and really began to refine this ability to drill horizontally and fracture long laterals. And as a result, as we saw in the Barnett Shale, billions of cubic feet, trillions of cubic feet of natural gas available. And then that technology is now being used in the oil patch in the Eagle Ford Shale and to some degree out in Midland in the Permian Basin to find oil and natural gas liquids. So some estimates are that there are 100 to 200 years worth of natural gas available in Texas. Where only 5 years ago we thought we were running out of natural gas. And the economic development engine of this is truly quite startling. Just in the Eagle Ford, just in South Texas, the economists at the University of Texas, San Antonio estimate that this is a $25 billion economic impact over the next 10 years. There are 30,000 people working in the oil and gas patch in South Texas, over 300,000 working in Texas directly, and probably 2 million indirectly affected. And of course, we know what's happening with oil and gas severance taxes, deposits into the rainy day fund. It is truly an economic engine that is lifting all boats and is really providing economic growth for our state and the country.
Right. Well, in fact, as people look ahead to the next legislative session, and there's brief glimpses of optimism about the budget situation, the possibility of having some money to do this or do that a little bit proactively. It's often said, thank the Eagle Ford Shale for what's going on. And of course, nothing comes, without consequences. People will pick at anything. It doesn't make a difference how good it appears to be or good it is. But as you know, with all this economic development, which is undeniable, there have been some concerns raised about the impact on roads. Phil Wilson over at TxDOT, who is not exactly the director of Earth First, has nonetheless been complaining about some concerns about how roads have been impacted by this. We've heard about the consumption of water in some of the communities where the shale activity has been at the highest, that may be exacerbating in those communities what is already a problem with water. We've heard about air pollution numbers going up after some years of the trajectory being down, starting to go back up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, possibly attributable to the Barnett. We've heard about methane, in particular down in the Eagle Ford Shale, which is especially problematic if you believe in climate change. Methane is supposed to be worse than just regular old air pollution as far as all that goes. You can come after any one of these if you want. Generally speaking, there have been some concerns raised associated with this shale activity, and I wonder if you would comment about any of that and where you see it versus the obvious benefits to the state.
Well, you raised a lot of issues, so let me try to address them. The economic benefits are overwhelming. For example, in the Eagle Ford, if you can pass a drug test and get a driver's license, you can make $80,000 a year. The unemployment rate in Midland now is 2.5%. It's the third lowest in America.
In fact, there's no place for many of those oil and gas workers to live.
Companies are beginning to build housing for them. And so we've seen, for example, in the Eagle Ford, an area which had been predominantly used for farming, ranching, and for hunting.
Yep.
And I'm all in favor of hunting. That's a great thing. But now they have this revenue opportunity they never had before, and it's literally changing. So water is an issue,
Right.
and I think it'll probably be discussed a lot this coming legislative session.
Well, we know it is as a general issue, but specific as it relates to the are you concerned about the consumption of water in some of these places?
Fracking does use a lot of water.
Yeah.
But in terms of percentage, it's relatively small. It's probably 1% of all the water use that is consumed in the state of Texas.
Yeah.
And the companies are working to use less water, and certainly to use less potable water. So they're using brackish water, they're experimenting with non-water substitutes, all the things that we would like to see happen to use less potable water. On the road situation, it's really a question of, will the revenue streams associated with increasing the value of those property eventually catch up with what's happening with the roads? I'm encouraged that the county judges, county commissioners, and landowners are working with the companies down there to try to solve the problem in the short run. I know several of them.
You acknowledge that there is a problem in the
Several of them are making great effort. Several of the companies are making great effort, though, to address some of the road issues in order to try to relieve some of the challenges before the revenue streams from all this increased economic activity catch up, flow into the county coffers, and can then be used for road repair.
So you think that, in fact, to the degree that there are issues, the revenue generated by this activity may, in fact, come in and solve those problems?
I think it will. And in addition, the companies are working with the local leaders to try to solve the problems.
Yeah.
They want to have a good relationship because this is likely to be a long-term
deal.
relationship.
Right. What about on the pollution stuff?
Well, in terms, you mentioned specifically the Barnett Shale, Dallas-Fort Worth.
I mentioned the air pollution in Dallas-Fort Worth, and I mentioned the general concerns about methane.
So with regard to methane, remember that when methane is released, that is a revenue stream that is leaving from the producers. So they have an incentive to capture the methane as well and then sell it and turn it into a profitable product. What we are trying to do is build enough pipe in order to capture every bit of production that's coming to the surface, send it to the refinery until where it's ultimately consumed. That takes time.
Yep.
So the production usually outpaces the pipe infrastructure development because you can drill a well in a much shorter period of time than you can build a pipe. Now the pipe is beginning to catch up. We think that we'll be able to alleviate some of these challenges on methane as we add additional pipe infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. So the shale activity is obviously a big focus of your time and attention. I mean, it's a huge benefit, but there are other things you've been working on, and this week you released revised well integrity regulations. You had done a draft release in September. You've now done a release of new rules. Can you talk about your activity on this front? The rare thing, environmental groups have actually been saying nice things about you and the Railroad Commission. I keep thinking, what are you doing wrong? But they're actually, I've heard compliments from environmental groups that you're at least attempting to get at some of these persistent issues related to.
Well, if you'll remember, Smitty used to compliment me from time to time when I was at the PUC.
It's not a big brand you want to have, actually. Right?
As a background for some of the people here, what we're attempting to do is to rewrite some of our rules. It's under what's called Rule 13, to really bring our procedures up to speed and to use best practices with regard to well integrity and cementing. And we're taking from the best practices in the industry, some other best practices that we've seen, and we're taking those and incorporating them with everyone's comments into what is likely to be adopted in January or February, which will require some additional cementing along some areas where we think there are perhaps some particular challenges. We also want to try to be proactive, because if we think this is a long-term play, then the amount of oil and gas development will just expand dramatically. We want to make sure we have the right rules in place, also with an eye toward more injection wells, because when you frack a well, you have flowback water that comes back up. We have to do something with this material. We're injecting it down into deep saline aquifers. We're going to need more injection capability going forward, but we want to make sure that that is not located too close to producing wells, and if it's within the proximity, that well is cemented correctly so that we maintain the integrity of the well.
Right. So you say those rules now, the draft has come back with revisions, released again this week. It'll be January, February before those rules are.
Right, we've asked for another 30 or 40 days
Right.
of comment.
Yep.
We'll take those comments, we'll turn them around into a proposed rule for adoption.
Yep.
We'll discuss it probably in January, February. Of course, we'll have a new member with Christy Craddock joining us soon.
Right.
And she'll weigh on this with her point of view as well.
Yeah.
And then we'll have it, I think, for serious consideration and discussion in late January and February.
Do the well integrity rules that you're now discussing deal with old abandoned wells as well? The concerns, you hear a lot about concerns about old abandoned wells and the possibility of seepage into the water system. How much of that is being addressed in the well integrity rules?
This is not really addressed in this particular rule,
Right.
though we're certainly cognizant of that. And
Yeah.
one of our activities is to plug as many wells as we can.
Yeah.
In fact, I recently asked our staff, tell me what it would cost to plug every abandoned well in
Yeah.
Texas. Because we're doing about 200 to 250 a month.
Yeah.
And we're making progress, but there was a big backlog of them.
Maybe
So
not fast enough.
what I would like to do is to try to take all of the abandoned wells, plug them all as quickly as possible, so that we're in a better position as we see this incredible extended expansion of oil and gas happen, that we knock those out of the way and we position ourselves to handle any challenges going forward.
So the well integrity rules are one thing. I keep hearing about frack water recycling rules. Are you about to release the?
We've been working on that
Right.
for quite some time.
So what's the status
We've
of
been
that?
getting comments. I think it's getting very close
Yeah.
to being released for additional comment and perhaps for adoption.
On a slightly longer timeline out than the well integrity rules.
These well integrity rules are really big rules. They're
Yeah.
very complicated. There are pages of them, and so our staff and the stakeholders and everyone involved has
Right.
been working diligently. And I think that one will probably happen before the recycling. But what we want to do with regard to recycling, strip away any impediments that
Yep.
a company would be encountering if they want to recycle, if they want to take flowback fluid and use it again in another well, use it on that site, or move it to another pad and use it as part of their drilling campaign. All of this, of course, we want to do so we can continue to reap this incredible bounty of oil and gas and continue the economic activity that we have going. But we need to be cognizant of some of the issues that
Yeah.
we're seeing.
Is the concern about contamination of water as a result of fracking legitimate? I know this discredited UT study was just in the news, and the fallout of that notwithstanding. There are a lot of people who really put forward this open question about the degree to which fracking does some kind of meaningful contamination of water. And I wonder if you would give us your perspective.
Well, remember, we've been fracking wells in Texas for over 50 years.
Yeah.
We were fracking vertical wells for a long time.
Yeah.
Now, because of Mr. Mitchell and others, we've taken that fracking technology and gone horizontal.
But
with
is this something we should be worried about?
and we're fracking much longer laterals.
Yeah.
So there's never been a recorded case of fracking contaminating fresh water. In fact, Lisa Jackson, the EPA administrator, in testifying to Congress not long ago, admitted this herself.
Acknowledged
She
that.
acknowledged this.
Right.
And whether you look at the Range Resources case that we had in Texas, cases up in Wyoming and in Dimmock, Pennsylvania, after investigation, the EPA itself concluded that this methane was naturally occurring. It
Yeah.
had not been caused by fracking.
So not something, as far as you're concerned, we should be that way.
It's not an issue.
Right. Are there other rules and regulations beyond the well integrity and the water recycling that you're working on that you want to tell us about?
Well, we're also working on modifying our rules in response to the Denbury decision. And just so everyone here knows, the Supreme Court earlier this spring, in a unanimous decision, concluded that the process that the Railroad Commission used, an old process before I got there, to determine if a pipeline was a common carrier and therefore eligible to use eminent domain, was not sufficiently robust. We didn't ask enough questions. We didn't require enough proof. And so we're in the process of rewriting that rule with regard to CO2 pipeline, which is what the court told us specifically we needed to do. And so the staff is taking comments on that.
Anything
as well.
else big on the horizon in the area of rules and regs?
Well, I think that about does it for now.
It's enough.
It's enough.
Well, do you-
we also have a sunset bill that we have to get through.
Oh, well, we'll talk about that. Do we get a timeout when the session comes in terms of rules and regs making? Do you go on pause there? How is the session going to impact all this?
Yeah, this is my fifth session,
Right.
including Public Utility Commission work. And what I like to do is to get to a point where we can wrap up some of our rulemakings early in the session.
Yeah.
That gives the members an opportunity, if they want to weigh in on what we're doing at the commission, they
Yeah.
can give us some thoughts.
Right.
Or if they want to take our work and then turn it into a bill, they could do that as well.
Right.
So we've started the ball rolling. Our intent is to complete these, but we are certainly open to any comments or thoughts that we get from the members. Yes.
So we're hearing already a lot about public ed, higher ed, healthcare, not surprisingly, big ticket items that are on everyone's minds at the beginning of every session. This session, especially water and transportation, are also on the list of agenda items, as well as some of the stuff that may creep in on the side, some social issues that may find their way into the conversation. We expect a full agenda. But what I'm not hearing really on anybody's lists are big agendas items related to energy. Maybe you think that's a good thing. Maybe the less attention on your world, the better. But I wonder if you're looking ahead to the session and thinking, these are the one or two or three things in my portfolio that are likely to be most active or most in play.
Well, it's most important that we get our sunset bill through.
Yeah.
As you recall, last session, the Railroad Commission was unable to get its life extended for another 12 years. It was probably not the Railroad Commission's finest hour. There was some acrimony between the members and the commission. And I think everyone would say now that we have a new commission with a new attitude and a very positive working relationship.
You're getting a do-over, basically.
You know, we have a very positive working relationship with the legislature, and so getting our bill passed and getting it passed early so that we can continue.
That's the big goal.
Well, it's a goal, and I think the members are eager to do that as well. They have a lot on their plate. I just want to get out of their way and let them get back to the other things that you mentioned.
Of course, that's about you all, which I understand, totally fine. But tell me about issues that relate to us all, right? So what on the legislative agenda do you think is going to be of concern to all of us here as it relates to energy? What are you keeping watch over specifically?
Well, energy affects everybody, no question about that, because of the job creation associated with it, the revenue streams associated with it, and the fact that we literally have within our grasp the opportunity to be energy independent in America. Many studies are saying that by 2020, 2025, we could stop importing oil from Saudi Arabia or Russia or Venezuela. And this provides us with an opportunity to keep our money here at home, keep our jobs here at home, and to some degree isolate America from events that might happen in the Middle East. Right. You've heard presidents since 1950 talk about energy independence. Yeah. We actually have the ability to get there.
What can the Texas legislature specifically do about that?
Pass the sunset bill for the Railroad Commission so that we can continue to regulate this industry that is making such a huge contribution. Let me just give you some numbers about production. So today in Texas, we're producing about 1.4, 1.5 million barrels of liquid a day. That's up from 900,000 a day just 2 years ago. Yeah. That is more than America imports from Saudi Arabia. I believe that we could double that number by 2018, 2020. We could triple it by 2025. We could be producing in Texas 3.5 to 4 million barrels a day. That is the equivalent of the oil that we get from OPEC presently.
So what's stopping us?
Nothing's stopping us unless we get some bad anti-fracking regulations or statutes out of the Congress. That's the only thing. All of this is made possible.
You look at this Congress, you're expecting any bad anti-fracking statutes out of this Congress?
Well, certainly in terms of regulations from the EPA, and also I'm concerned about fish and wildlife activity on endangered species. Right. We have been fighting against regulations that we think are not based in science. Right.
Well, let's go there, actually, because as you know, hating on the EPA has become sport in the state for some time. It is the area of activity where, among our many lawsuits filed against the federal government, the state's actually gotten some traction, has gotten some favorable response on the cross-state air pollution, on flex permitting, on pollution control permitting. All of those, the EPA has been rebuked. You all have Dr. Armendariz' head on a pike, like on Game of Thrones now, which you can all celebrate, I suppose. But I wonder, where is your head at on the EPA today? You've won some very specific victories pushing back against the EPA, but the reality is president's been reelected, whether it's Lisa Jackson or somebody else, the Obama EPA is going to be in there for another 4 years. What should the position of Texas be with regard to the EPA? Is it going to be essentially neutral corners for the next 4 years, or are you all going to be able to find some common ground on some of these issues?
Well, you mentioned the successes that we had, for example, on the cross-state air pollution rule. That was the one that would have required Texas to dramatically reduce SO2 and NOx. in such a rapid period of time that we would effectively had to close some power plants down and maybe not been able to keep the lights on. We won on that resoundingly. Now, there's going to be motions for an en banc hearing, which means the whole court gets to hear it, and it might go to the Supreme Court. So we're not out of the woods yet on that.
Yeah.
I'm really worried about endangered species activity because the lesser prairie chicken has just been placed on the watch list, and now we have a year to prove that there are enough lesser prairie chickens that we don't have to put it on the endangered species list. And the LPC just happens to reside where there's a lot of oil and gas production throughout the state of Texas and Oklahoma. So that's of great concern. And an overriding concern is continued regulation of greenhouse gases. This came out of the endangerment finding, which has been upheld by the Court of Appeals, that the EPA has the ability to regulate CO2, methane, and 5 or 6 other greenhouse gases. What we are likely to see is a continued ratcheting down of the permitted levels of CO2. Mm-hmm. This is all consistent with the administration's war on climate change. And as a state that makes things, as an industrial state, a drilling state, a power generation state, we have to be very concerned about any attempts to try to unilaterally disarm the Texas economy.
You're willing to talk to the federal government, as some folks in this state on other issues have been less willing to do?
Well, we've reached out to, whether it's Gina McCarthy at the EPA, or our staff has talked to the new EPA.
You got a new guy who replaced
for Region 6.
Region 6.
And we certainly want to have a dialogue, but we're always going to push back if the regulations are not grounded in science and in the facts. And the cross-state air pollution rule, a great example. The court threw that out because they said it was wildly arbitrary and capricious and really was punishing Texas disproportionately.
Right. You take comfort in those court rulings, obviously.
I take comfort in that, but we're not finished yet.
I understand. You mentioned the sunset review of the Railroad Commission a couple times, so let me go there specifically. So we did have a sunset report, or advisory commission report on recommendations that you all ought to adopt, and then we had in November a response from the commission institutionally, speaking on behalf of the commission. And I want to ask you about a couple things.
Which, by the way, did not happen last session. There was no response
back
from the commission.
Okay. Well, it was helpful to get a window on the thinking of the commission institutionally, and we know about the name change that's coming. I guess it will be the Texas Energy Resources Commission. I think it's a little bit of alphabet soup, TCEQ, TERC. I've already got a headache thinking about this, but okay. So you're going to, finally it will be more properly named. We got that. There was some discussion of you all having a hand in, they recommended, and you actually agreed with this, having a hand in regulating or having oversight over interstate as well as intrastate pipelines. Can you talk about that?
Pipelines are very important because we need to make sure they're operated safely.
Right.
And so what we want to make sure is that we have the resources and the jurisdiction to inspect and to review and to make sure that we have pipeline integrity and that everyone can be assured that pipelines are safe. And this is our objective.
And effectively one standard covering both intra and interstate pipelines.
Right. Today there are interstate pipelines, and we don't have jurisdiction over those, but we do have jurisdiction over intrastate, and we think we have the expertise and ability to ride herd over both of them.
The Railroad Commission has for a long time been criticized for not having robust enough inspections or enough inspectors. So if you want to take on the additional responsibility of doing interstate as well as intrastate, do you have enough personnel, enough inspectors to actually carry this off properly?
We've actually requested that we'd be able to add some additional people for inspection. One of the issues with regard to our personnel is out in the district offices where the inspectors live, we had gotten too lean, and in my opinion, we had too many people in Austin and not enough people out in the districts.
You're trying to change
that. So we're changing that.
Right.
We want to be adding people out in the district offices where the work gets done and using the least amount of people as we can in Austin, which is the administrative personnel.
So, of course, there were these recommendations, and again, in many instances, the Commission's response back was, we generally agree with this. But there were a couple of which you didn't agree, and they really related not to the substantive work of the Commission, but to the aspects of the Commissioner's own political activity. And I want to ask about that because that is where the big pushback was. Three things in particular caught my eye. The first was the suggestion, it seems perfectly reasonable what the Sunset Commission is suggesting to me, that when there are contested cases before the Commission, that commissioners should not accept contributions from the producers involved in those contested cases. Logically, it seems to me, and it may seem to other people, well, yeah, the perception of you all being in the pocket of industry is not helped by the idea that when there are contested cases before the commission, you're taking contributions from those producers. But institutionally, the commission said, we disagree with that recommendation. Why is that?
Well, let's remember, this is an elected office, and it's a big state. And having just run the first time, I can tell you that it's also an expensive state to run a campaign. So we want to be treated just like every other statewide elected official, non-judicial. Apply the same rules to us that you would apply to anyone else. That is generally our position on all of these recommendations associated with campaign finance.
So you don't think that the perception of you all being in the pocket of industry is fostered or advanced by the idea that when people have business, contested cases before the commission, you all effectively have your hands out to those very people?
We make decisions based upon the facts and the law. I've always done that. I did that my 7.5 years at the PUC, and I'll continue to do it here.
Yeah.
Unaffected by campaign contributions. You have to run for office. It's an elected position.
Right.
In order to do that, you need to raise some money.
Okay, so to that specifically, there was a second recommendation from Sunset that institutionally the commission disagreed with, although I gather you may disagree with at least one of your fellow commissioners on this, that the period of time in which you can solicit and collect contributions at the moment is all 6 years of the term. There was a recommendation that it be limited to 18 months. Institutionally, the commission said, we disagree with that recommendation, although I've read at least one place where you've said, I, Barry Smitherman, am actually okay with 18 months. Commissioner Porter was not okay with 18 months.
In talking to former commissioners, several of them told me that there used to be a gentleman's, gentlelady's agreement that the only commissioner who would actively campaign and raise money would be the one that was running next, the one that was up.
Right.
And that seemed to me like a good idea.
Right, you've just run, so you wouldn't then have any motivation or impetus to collect contributions right now.
You know, I just came off of a 17-month campaign, and we did fine, raising money starting last August. So I put that on the table as an idea that I thought the commission could address itself. I don't think it needs to be done in statute. I think we could do it ourselves. And when Christy Craddock comes on board, maybe we'll talk about it again. I think it's a bad idea to put these sort of limitations in statute, but I was comforted by the fact that in the past, the commissioners had taken care of the issue themselves.
So again, I ask you again about the perception that somehow the Railroad Commission is in the pocket of industry. This is not a concern, generally speaking?
I think we have to conduct ourselves appropriately. We have to make the right decisions. We have to study the issues. We have to work hard. I think I come to this position with a reputation of working very hard and being knowledgeable about the issues, and that's the way I'm going to base my decision. It's an elected office. We do have to run, and we have to raise money.
All right, let me try then, unsuccessful in the first two, let me try a third recommendation of the Sunset Commission that, again, you all institutionally said we don't agree with, and that is that when someone on the commission announces for another office, they have to resign immediately from the commission. Again, seems reasonable. You all said no, we don't agree with that.
No one else in state government has to do that. Nobody else at the state level has to do it. And I think this is more a reflection of frustration last session because two of the railroad commissioners were running for the U.S. Senate at the same time against each other.
Yeah.
And that's a dynamic that many found unpalatable.
Made a bunch of oil and gas lobbyists a lot poorer for no reason, since neither one of them won that office.
So our position is just treat us like everybody else. We shouldn't have to resign to run. Nobody else has to.
But you understand that there's something particular about the Railroad Commission. The Railroad Commission feels, at least from the near outside, particularly susceptible to the perceptions of this going on. And it's been exacerbated by the fact, as my colleague Ross...
The perceptions that it's a launching pad?
It's a perception that some agencies are lily pads and some are leap pads. This was Ross Ramsey's articulation of it. And the Railroad Commission has, at least in recent memory, always been a leap pad.
Well, if it is, it's not a very good one.
Well, I don't know. Well, it may not be a very good one in the sense that neither Ms. Jones nor Mr. Williams ended up in the jobs they wanted. But the reality is they may be exceptions in that respect. There have been a long history of railroad commissioners who show up in the building and before the ink is dry on their business cards are already looking to run for another office. In fact, Mr. Smitherman, Mr. Chairman, Are you running for Attorney General in 2014?
You know, I was just elected to this job
That
5
doesn't seem
weeks
to
ago.
matter to anybody else.
5 weeks ago, so let me enjoy this one a little bit longer.
Have you ruled out running for another office in 2014?
I've already started my re-election campaign
for Railroad
Commission.
6 years out.
No, I'm up again in 2014.
Oh, right, you're up again in 2014,
Yeah.
right. But so you're committed now. Are you foreclosing in front of this audience and those cameras? Are you foreclosing on running for any other office?
We began our campaign for re-election for 2014 the day after this election was over, during this brief window of opportunity.
Right. So you will not run for any other office?
We are committed today to running for re-election, and that's everything
but
that my
that's a
campaign
massive
is
hedge,
doing.
Mr. Chairman. We're committed today is not the same as I'm not running for another office.
All I can tell you is I'm running for re-election. I've been campaigning for re-election, and I was raising money for re-election to the Railroad Commissioner. And there's many letters, and I've made many phone calls to my historical supporters, telling them exactly that.
I tried. All right, Mr. Chairman, we're going to let it go there. We'll open up the audience to questions, but thank you very much for your generosity today and for being here. Chairman Smitherman, thank you very much.